So the U.S. Constitution has been around for, what, over 2 centuries? Right?
Yeah, quite a long time.
And it's only been amended 27 times in all those years.
Right.
But then you look at the Indian Constitution, it's, just 74 years old.
Yeah, as of early 2024.
Right. And it's already been amended 106 times.
It is a staggering number.
It really is. So welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone. Today, we're looking at this really fascinating paradox that we found hidden inside a stack of constitutional history and research.
It's a great topic.
Because when you look at the history of nations, creating foundational rules for a country is, well, it's a lot like trying to build a permanent house on an active earthquake fault line.
The ground is literally always shifting beneath you.
Exactly. I mean, just look at the Soviet Union. In its 74-year lifespan, it went through 4 entirely different constitutions.
Oh, yeah. Or take France.
Right.
Since its revolution, France has cycled through 5 different republics, and each time they essentially tear up the old rule book and just start fresh.
Which seems wild, but...
Actually, it's almost the historical norm.
Really?
Yeah, for nations to just demolish the whole legal structure and start over when they hit major political upheavals or shifting ideologies, the pressure of time and change usually just snaps the foundation.
But the Constitution of India, which was adopted in November 1949 and implemented in January 1950, it has survived 74 years.
Unbroken.
Unbroken. It has outlived massive societal shifts, huge economic transformations, and really intense political turmoil.
All while remaining the exact same foundational framework.
So how does a rule book survive that long without breaking? That is our mission today. We are exploring how this specific constitution acts, not as some, static frozen text locked in a museum somewhere.
Right, not just a relic.
Exactly, but as a living document that breathes and adapts and survives these really fierce political tugs of war. So, okay, let's unpack this because that staggering statistic I mentioned at the top.
106 amendments.
Yeah, 106 amendments in 74 years compared to America's 27 over 200 years. It really makes you wonder.
Yeah.
If a constitution is supposed to be this sacred, untouchable document, how and why are they changing it so often?
Well, to understand the frequency of those changes, we have to look at the dual challenge that the framers of any constitution face.
Okay.
A constitution has to solve the immediate pressing problems of its founders, obviously.
Right, the stuff happening right then.
But it also has to provide a workable framework for future unborn generations. And that is the tricky part.
You can't predict the future.
Exactly. If you make it too sacred, it becomes brittle. It just shatters the moment society changes. But on the flip side, if you make it too easy to change, it's just a regular law. It becomes subject to the whims of whoever won the last election.
So it's a balancing act.
Right. And instead of the cliche Goldilocks metaphor of being just right, think of it more like modern skyscraper engineering.
Oh, like how the tallest buildings are built to actually sway in the wind.
Precisely that structural logic, yeah. A skyscraper's steel framework is designed to intentionally sway in hurricane winds or, seismic activity.
All right, because if it was perfectly rigid...
If it were built out of entirely rigid, unyielding concrete, the pressure would just cause it to snap.
Wow, okay.
So the framers of the Indian Constitution built in a sway mechanism. They created a 3-tiered system for making amendments.
The tiers, okay. Break that down for me.
So the first tier is for basic administrative changes, and it requires only a simple majority in Parliament.
Just a normal majority vote.
Yep. So if they need to, say, admit new states or alter state boundaries, which actually falls under Articles 2 and 3, they can do it with a simple majority.
Makes sense.
It's highly flexible, so the government isn't paralyzed over administrative housekeeping.
Right. I mean, you don't want a full-blown constitutional crisis just because you need to redraw a district line.
Exactly. But then the second tier is where the framework gets much stiffer.
The sway gets a little more restrictive.
Right. This is governed by Article 368. And it's designed for more significant changes to the Constitution. It requires a special majority in both houses of Parliament separately.
Okay, special majority.
And then finally, the third tier is for changes that affect core federal issues. Right.
like the distribution of power between the central government and the individual states.
It's huge.
Right. So that requires the special majority in Parliament plus ratification by the legislatures of at least half the states in the country.
Wait, let me stop you there. I want to push back on this second tier, this special majority concept.
Sure.
Because when you read the source material and actually look at the mathematical formula required, it's an absolute headache.
It is quite complex.
Let me walk you through the math here just to show how crazy this is. So in the Lok Sabha, which is the lower house, there are 545 members.
Correct.
To pass an amendment, you need an absolute minimum of 273 members supporting it.
Which is just over half.
Right, more than half the total seats. But there's a second condition.
The attendance rule.
Yes. Those voting in favor must also constitute at least 2/3 of whoever is actually present and voting that day.
Right.
So imagine you're the prime minister. You bring a major amendment to the floor, but it's, I don't know, a rainy day or there's a political boycott, and only 300 members show up to vote.
Okay.
2/3 of 300 is 200. But because you still need that absolute minimum of 273 to pass anything,
The bill fails.
the bill fails even if 260 people vote for it out of 300. You'd literally need almost everyone in the room to agree.
It's a very high bar.
If it requires that kind of nearly unanimous alignment, doesn't that just completely paralyze the government? How's that flexible?
Well, what's fascinating here is how this seemingly paralyzing mathematical hurdle intentionally forces political compromise.
How so?
Let's say a ruling party has a very thin, shaky majority.
Okay.
They might be able to scrape by and pass a regular annual budget, even if the entire opposition bloc is completely against them.
Because it's just a simple majority.
Right. But amending the Constitution, that strict math practically guarantees they cannot do it alone. They are forced to reach across the aisle.
They need the opposition.
They have to convince at least some opposition parties to join them. Dr. Ambedkar, who was one of the primary architects of the Constitution,
Right.
he argued that if you can't get that 2/3 majority, it simply means the general public doesn't actually share your dissatisfaction with the current rule.
Oh, wow.
It ensures that any major change reflects the will of a vast portion of the country, not just a temporary, narrow political majority trying to flex its muscles.
That is brilliant.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've ever tried to get a room of 20 coworkers to agree on where to order lunch, imagine trying to get 300 rival politicians to agree on a constitutional change.
It's nearly impossible without real consensus.
It forces a broad public consensus. Okay, so what does this all mean for those 106 amendments?
Good question.
Because if the math is so difficult and it requires so much cross-party consensus, how did they manage to edit this foundational document 106 times? Does that imply the original society was just deeply flawed? Or the founders left massive gaps in the text?
It is really tempting to look at a high number of edits and assume the first draft was just bad.
Right, like they messed up.
But the high number is actually a reflection of a rapidly evolving society using that structural sway we talked about.
Okay, the skyscraper swaying.
Exactly. When we look at the data in the sources, we can categorize these amendments to understand what's actually happening. Not all 106 changes are massive foundation-shaking overhauls.
So they aren't all rewriting the core identity.
Not at all. A
Mhm.
huge chunk of them are just technical or administrative amendments. For instance, the 15th Amendment simply updated the retirement age of high court judges from 60 to 62.
So that's just a quick patch update to the operating system.
Very much so. Then you have amendments tied to deep societal commitments, like the reservation of seats in the legislature for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes.
Okay, let's talk about that.
To give some context, these are groups that have faced centuries of systemic historical marginalization in India.
Right.
The framers built in affirmative action quotas for them in the original text, but they set a time limit of 10 years.
Just 10 years initially.
Right. However, to ensure fair representation continued, because obviously those historical inequities hadn't just vanished overnight,
Yeah, of course not.
Parliament has repeatedly passed amendments extending that period by another 10 years. It has happened 6 times.
Oh, wow.
So legally, they are constitutional amendments, but they don't change the underlying spirit of the document.
They are essentially recurring calendar reminders baked into the Constitution to ensure marginalized voices aren't suddenly pushed out of the room.
That's a great way to put it.
So what's another category?
Another major category is consensus amendments. These happen when society has shifted, and there is broad agreement across the political spectrum that the rules just need to catch up.
Give me an example of that.
A prime example is the 61st Amendment, which lowered the minimum voting age from 21 to 18.
Oh, sure. Pretty standard modernization.
Or the 52nd and 91st Amendments, which introduced anti-defection laws. Those were designed to stop politicians from constantly switching parties after being elected, which was really destabilizing governments.
Now, looking at the timeline of these amendments in our sources, there's a fascinating trend that perfectly highlights this idea of consensus.
The 2000 spike.
Yes. Between 2001 and 2003, there was this massive spike. They passed 10 amendments in just 3 years.
It was a very busy time.
And the context here is crucial. This was an era of bitter coalition politics in India.
Right.
The ruling party didn't have a massive dominant majority like the governments in the early decades of the Republic did. They were dealing with dozens of regional rival parties controlling different states.
It was very fragmented.
Yet even when political rivals were constantly fighting, they could still reach a consensus on evolving the nation's rules. They managed to pass 10 amendments in 3 years because society agreed on certain progressive measures, like expanding reservations in government jobs.
Exactly.
It proves that the system works even when the political waters are incredibly choppy.
But that brings up the ultimate test of a constitution.
What's that?
What happens when the political waters aren't just choppy, but form a Category 5 hurricane?
Right.
What happens when the politicians don't agree and instead they clash head-on with the courts?
Oh, man. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we rewind a bit from the 2000s back to the 1970s, we enter an era that I can only describe as a Google Doc edit war.
That is an excellent, if modern, analogy for the turbulence between 1970 and 1976.
It really is.
To look at this impartially, we have to unpack the deep socioeconomic clash of the time.
Set the scene for us.
On one side, you had the parliament and the executive branch. They felt they had a massive public mandate to enact sweeping pro-people, anti-poverty laws. Specifically, they wanted to implement aggressive land redistribution, which meant taking large estates from wealthy landowners and redistributing them to landless farmers.
Right.
And they also wanted to nationalize private banks. They believed that if strict legal procedures or existing constitutional interpretations stood in the way of lifting millions out of poverty, they should have the power to just bypass or amend those rules.
And on the other side, you had the judiciary acting as the firewall.
Exactly.
The Supreme Court kept striking these laws down because the original Constitution explicitly contained a fundamental right to property.
Right. The judiciary insisted that bypassing established fundamental rights, even with the best, most noble intentions of alleviating poverty, sets a dangerous precedent.
The slippery slick.
They argued that once you allow a government to ignore the constitutional framework to achieve a policy goal, you open the door for arbitrary, unchecked power.
Wow.
From the court's perspective, a democracy isn't just about representing the immediate will of the people, it's also about maintaining strict checks and balances and the rule of law.
So it is the ultimate struggle. It's the speed and mandate of political action versus the safety and restraint of legal procedure.
Exactly.
And this tension exploded into a massive back and forth. It's literally like two people with admin access fighting over a shared document, constantly undoing each other's edits in real time.
It really was.
Parliament would pass a sweeping economic law. The Supreme Court would strike it down for violating property rights. So Parliament would pass a constitutional amendment to override the court's ruling and protect their law, and then the court would review the amendment.
It culminated in a severe constitutional crisis during the mid-1970s.
And the peak of this edit war was the infamous 42nd Amendment.
Yes, the 42nd.
The sources note this happened during a declared national emergency where civil liberties were actually suspended.
Very dark period.
The government argued this emergency measure was necessary to maintain internal order and push through vital economic reforms, while critics obviously argued it was a blatant power grab.
Right.
But regardless of the motive, the 42nd Amendment was staggering in its scope. It wasn't a patch update.
Not at all.
It rewrote 53 articles. It changed the preamble of the Constitution. It severely restricted the review powers of the judiciary. It even extended the duration of the Lok Sabha from 5 years to 6 years.
It was viewed by many legal scholars at the time as practically a rewriting of the original Constitution to just consolidate executive power.
A total override.
But this is where we see the durability of the democratic framework kick in. Following the 1977 elections, that ruling party was defeated.
The voters said their say.
Exactly. The new government came in and immediately utilized the 43rd and 44th Amendments to essentially hit Control-Z.
Oh, wow.
They canceled most of the controversial changes made by the 42nd Amendment. They restored the 5-year election term, and critically, they restored the review powers of the courts.
They reverted the Google Doc back to its previous version.
That's pretty much.
It's a wild pendulum swing. But reading through this back and forth raises a huge question. If a government gets enough seats to clear that mathematical hurdle we talked about earlier, what stops them from just rewriting the entire document? How does a democratic system stop this endless rewriting of the rules? before the whole document just falls apart into meaninglessness.
That is the existential question for any written constitution.
And how did India solve it?
The solution that emerged in India is widely considered one of the most significant and, frankly, most fascinating legal doctrines in modern democratic history.
Okay, I'm hooked.
It came from the Supreme Court in 1973 in a landmark case known as Kesavananda Bharati.
Okay, let's dive into that because the details of this case are wild. Who was Kesavananda Bharati?
He was a Hindu monk.
A monk.
Yes. The state government in Kerala passed land reform acts aimed at reducing inequality, and they targeted the land owned by his monastery to redistribute it.
Okay.
Kesavananda Bharati sued, arguing that the state's actions violated his fundamental rights to manage his religious property. The case escalated all the way to the Supreme Court, ultimately requiring a 13-judge bench, which is the largest in Indian history, to settle the core issue once and for all.
Which was?
Does Parliament have unlimited power to amend the Constitution?
So Parliament is saying we have Article 368, we have the special majority, we can change whatever we want.
Exactly.
And the monk is saying, no, there have to be limits. So what did the 13 judges decide?
The Supreme Court established what is now known as the Basic Structure Doctrine.
The Basic Structure Doctrine.
The court essentially said to Parliament, yes, under Article 368, you have the power to amend the Constitution. You can amend almost any part of it to respond to socioeconomic needs.
Okay, so a win for Parliament.
Partially, because they added a massive caveat. However, you cannot use your amending power to violate, alter, or destroy the basic structure of the Constitution.
Wow.
The court used a brilliant structural logic to explain this. They argued that the power to amend a house means you can add a new room, you can upgrade the plumbing, or you can paint the walls. It does not give you the power to dynamite the foundation and build a completely different structure in its place.
That makes perfect sense.
Therefore, Parliament can amend, but it cannot destroy the core identity of the nation.
Wait, I read through the source material looking for this exact phrase.
The basic structure.
Yeah. Where exactly in the text of the Constitution does it list this basic structure?
You couldn't find it because it is not there.
Wait, what?
The phrase basic structure is nowhere in the 145,000 words of the written Constitution.
That completely blows my mind. The ultimate supreme rule that saves the physical written document from being destroyed is an entirely unwritten rule.
Exactly.
It was just derived conceptually by the judges.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the ultimate proof of a living document. The Constitution survived and evolved through a massive informal amendment without a single word of the physical text being formally changed via Article 368.
Incredible.
The judiciary interpreted the spirit of the document to protect the letter of the document.
But if the basic structure isn't written down, how does anyone know what it is? Like, how do you know if you're painting a wall or dynamiting the foundation?
Well, that is the beautiful tension of the doctrine. The 13-judge bench didn't provide a definitive, exhaustive list in 1973.
They just left it open.
Since then, over the past 5 decades, the court has elaborated on it case by case. Through various rulings, they've decided that concepts like democracy, judicial review, federalism, secularism, and the rule of law are part of the basic structure.
I saw so.
By saying certain core identity features cannot be touched, they set a hard, unwritten limit on political power while still allowing the rest of the document to remain flexible.
Now, this isn't the only time the text has evolved without a formal edit, is it? Because our sources highlight other informal amendments driven purely by judicial interpretation.
That's right.
Let's take the reservations for other backward classes, or OBCs. These are communities that, similar to scheduled castes and tribes, face significant historical socioeconomic disadvantages. When implementing affirmative action for OBCs, the Supreme Court introduced the concept of the creamy layer.
Right. The creamy layer principle dictates that wealthier or more socially advanced individuals within those historically disadvantaged groups are excluded from the reservation benefits.
To make sure it helps those who need it.
Exactly. The court wanted to ensure the benefits actually reach those within the community who need them most. And again, the words creamy layer are absolutely nowhere in the Constitution.
Wow.
But the interpretation fundamentally changes how the country is governed and how resources are allocated.
The text remains the exact same, but the meaning expands and contracts to fit a changing society. The institutions, the parliament, and the judiciary, they constantly push and pull against each other.
It's a constant dialogue.
Parliament wants to push forward with new socioeconomic laws to satisfy voters, and the judiciary pulls back to ensure it aligns with the foundational spirit.
We started this deep dive looking at a paradox. How has a single document survived 74 years of massive turbulent change when other nations just throw theirs out and start over?
Right.
The answer, it seems, is that the Indian constitution hasn't survived in spite of being challenged and changed. It has survived because it allows itself to be an arena for debate.
Going back to your skyscraper metaphor, the sway is the feature, not the bug.
Exactly.
On one side, you have the strict written text of the founders and the rigid mathematical hurdles of the amendment process.
Right.
And on the other side, you have the evolving, unwritten spirit interpreted by the judiciary and the messy, messy political compromises of Parliament. If the steel frame were too rigid, the winds of the 1970s or that coalition era of the 2000s would have just snapped it.
Absolutely.
But if we're too flexible, it would have been melted down and recast every time a new party took power. It survives by constantly balancing those forces.
This raises an important question, though, about where the ultimate power lies in this balancing act.
What do you mean?
Well, the basic structure doctrine essentially ended the Google Doc edit war by placing the judiciary as the final authority in deciding what the core of the Constitution actually is.
Which brings us back to you, listening to this. Think about the rules that govern your own life right now.
Yeah.
Whether it's the bylaws of your local community board, the culture and operating procedures of your workplace, or the laws of your country. A system only survives if it is flexible enough to grow, but rigid enough to protect its core identity.
That's the takeaway.
If you never update the rules, the system fails to meet the moment. But if you change everything every time there's a disagreement, you have no system at all. You need that structural sway.
But here is the lingering thought I want to leave you with today. We've established that the ultimate safeguard of this nation, the basic structure, isn't actually written down anywhere.
Right.
Its definition evolves purely based on the interpretations of unelected judges over decades. So, if the most crucial defense of a democracy is entirely unwritten and defined by the courts,
Yeah.
who really holds the ultimate power to define what a nation's core values are today?
Is it the people we elect to write the rules, or the people appointed to interpret them? It makes you wonder how solid the ground under that house really is. We'll leave you to ponder that. Until next time.